Welcome to our first episode of Roads to Equity, where there are many paths but one destination. Our conversations unapologetically elevate BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Dwight E. Rhodes, and we're thrilled to bring you today's show, The Power of Representation, Navigating Barrier-Breaking Leadership in the Arts. Our guest, Anwar Nasir, is the trailblazing executive director of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra. In this episode, we'll dive into Anwar's inspiring journey from a professional dancer to a leading figure in the orchestral world. You'll hear about the challenges Anwar faced and the personal experiences that shaped his approach to leadership. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Roads to Equity for more inspiring conversations with BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ leaders making a difference. Now, let's jump into our conversation with Anwar.
I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've lived all across this country throughout my career, but I think it's always been really interesting to figure out how people got there. And for me, I never thought that I was going to have a career in the arts, and I've been a performer kind of all of my life. I studied piano, trumpet, trombone. I was terrible at all three of those things. But I also had a professional career in dance as well, primarily as a hip hop dancer, but taught a lot of different forms of dance and did dibbled and dabbled, here and there in some other art forms. But the majority of my career was in dance. And when I retired from dancing professionally, I went to work for an orchestra for the first time. And kind of got bit by that orchestra bug. I really, really enjoyed what an orchestra could be and what it could do. And I think as my career continued to advance, my positions became much more public, and becoming a spokesperson for the institution and the organizations that I worked for, as opposed to just being a team member. And along with that comes a sense of responsibility, understanding that your life experience and all the things that make you who you are as a person helps to inform the work that you do, but also the responsibility that you carry along with that feels like sometimes a heavy burden, but also a gift, because all of the things that make me who I am, I think, help me further develop and lead from a space that might be different than a lot of my peers and colleagues. So I consider it a gift and a curse sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, Anwar. And I'm just wondering, can you dig a little deeper and tell us what do you mean by that? And particularly as it relates to our identity, right? Leading out and proud and being very unapologetic. My identities, we've discussed this before: Black, gay, married to an immigrant, Southerner, and agnostic. We've got all those many different types of identities. So I'm just curious about how that shaped your decision-making.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, like you said, you kind of check off all of those things. Like, for me personally, it's like being Black, gay, Muslim. I have, three Muslim names. So, and what's interesting is that none of those things outweigh the other, right? They're all a part of who I am, right? They're all the, pieces of the puzzle or pieces of the pie that make me whole. But the challenging part is that I can never hide those things, right? Like I walk into the room and the first thing that people see from me is that I'm Black, right? They don't necessarily always they can't see my sexuality or anything like that, but it's still a part of who I am, right? Same thing with my name. I get questioned a lot, like, oh, well, where's your family from? Where are your people from? And I'm like, well, they're from Philadelphia. And they're like, no, where are they really from? And I'm like, South Philadelphia, Center City. Like, so I'm trying to figure out, like, what questions are you really trying to ask me? And having to do that specifically in a space where there aren't a lot of people that look like me here. When I was appointed into my role as executive director, I was only the second Black person to lead a major American orchestra in this country, right? And there have been orchestras in this country for hundreds of years, but to really think that people like us haven't existed in this space, right? So then when you intersect someone that has some of these other personality types, and I'm not the only one now, but when you have some of these other things that make you whole, it definitely informs the work that I do. I think about our partnerships. I think about the music that we perform. I think about, people that grew up like me that maybe didn't think that an orchestra was for them. Like generally people have this perception in their mind that an orchestra, which is a traditionally Western European art form, but that all of our musicians wear tuxedos, that like could an orchestra be for me? And we have these conversations internally about like, well, how important is it that people feel welcomed into these spaces? And I feel really fortunate in the space that I'm in, that I can say, well, I want to make sure that we are opening the doors as widely as possible, and that we're also making sure that the orchestra gets out into the community in spaces that we maybe haven't done before. So a lot of the partnerships that we've been doing both on and off the stage have featured not only, people that have come from BIPOC representation. We had a big concert and we released an album recently with Big Frida, who is this kind of like queer icon in our spaces, but also having a Black queer icon is even more niche, right? So I don't know if this orchestra would have taken that risk had I not been here, so that to me is a way for us to show up and show up in spaces that we hadn't been before. Um, and I often think about like even how we show up for young people, like saying, well, no, we're not going to just, take our, our youth and bust them into our concert hall. We're going to go out and we're going to go to those schools. And we're going to show that this orchestra really cares about our community in ways that is meaningful and impactful. So imagine that the first time that you see the orchestra is in your own auditorium, right? Like we didn't have to get a bus and come downtown and mix and mingle with schools that we don't know and feel like we potentially don't have something that these other schools have. It's like, it's really important for me to say, and I always go, to these things, right? And I'm always there to like welcome and greet the students and talk to the teachers and, high five the kids as they're coming out. So there's that representation aspect, and there are things that, like when we're with fifth graders is different than we're with high school students, right? But it's showing that like that someone that looks like me can lead an institution, can be a part of an institution. And now these students have a different frame of reference about, these young people have a different frame of reference about what an orchestra can mean. Also, it shows up in the way that I show up to work every day. Every time we go to a concert, I might have on a suit and I'll wear my sneakers specifically with the suit to show that like, even if you don't have a tuxedo, even if you maybe can only show up in jeans and a nice shirt or jeans and a t-shirt, that this can be a place for you. I make sure that like now we got an invitation to go to Pride as well. So we're going to, have a table and a presence at Pride. And it's typically something that we haven't done before. And there's a cultural relevance, I think, that's now coming out in the work that we do. And I think like I personally want to make sure that, like I said, as a person that enjoys the art form, that I would want to be welcomed in that space. So I have to show up every day and I have to make sure that I'm setting an example, not only for our institution, but for the people that maybe have felt unwelcomed in the space before. So it's a very like, sometimes it's a lot of extra work on top of the things that I have to do with running the business. But I feel like it's critical to business development and it's critical to like just cultural relevancy for us as an institution. And we've been able to accomplish a lot over these last couple of years. And I feel incredibly tired, but also incredibly grateful for it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. That's really powerful. And I think about, you showing up authentically. I heard you say that, you might want to put on a suit with some sneakers, just to show that you don't necessarily need a tux to be a part of this, right? So it makes me wonder about what was a pivotal moment in your life that helped you connect with your identity to decide to live out and proud? Because that's not everybody's journey.
It's not, and I wouldn't be truthful if I said that I haven't struggled along the way. I think my career advancement happened pretty rapidly, and much more quickly than I had anticipated. I always had this kind of goal that I wanted to be the leader of an arts organization. I remember being 22, 23 years old, really just fresh out of college, saying I want this for myself, but having no clear path on how to get there. And there's a certain level of flying under the radar that can exist when you're in certain markets or in certain places within an institution. And I went from in a very short amount of time being a manager to being an assistant director to being a vice president to an executive director. And all of this happened over the course of, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years. And at the time of that, like going through some like just personal changes and like familial changes. Like as I mentioned, I've lived all across the country. My family's still based in Philadelphia. So I've been able to be, my authentic self, but not in a space where I had my family, any familial pressures and challenges with that, like just living my life. But also like I kind of always had this separation of like my work life is my work life and my personal life is my personal life. But as you become much more visible in your career, like, from a leadership standpoint, and I know that you can lead from all facets of the institution, right? So it's not about just being like the CEO, and that's the only place that you can lead from. But once you are in that chair, your personal life is your professional life at the same time. So you don't have those same opportunities to say, okay, well, the places that I like to go, or who I like to hang around, and if I want to go to Pride, or if I want to be seen in certain spaces where it's important for me to be seen. I can't separate that from my actual professional life. So I had to get comfortable very, very quickly with saying, this is who I am and this is what I do. But there's nothing wrong with who I am. And who I am makes me a much more competent leader because I have this cultural, and I have this cultural sensitivity about me that makes me think like, okay, if I step into a room and I don't feel welcomed, then imagine what somebody else might go through. And I had to put myself out there to say, well, I can't advocate on behalf of like opening the doors broader and wider without sharing a bit of my personal story so that way they understand where I'm coming from. Because I'm not the type of leader that says we're going to do it this way, it's my way or the highway. I want all of us, I'm very much a consensus builder and a community builder in my leadership style. So I want people to say, when I come to the table and I say, okay, well, we're missing the mark in this area. Like our audience is not as diverse as it should be, specifically like here in New Orleans or even in plenty of the other places that I've worked, that these are the reasons why we need to be expanding. And these are the reasons why we have to be thoughtful in the way that we're expanding, because it means something to me. And I want to be a part of an institution. And this has like been a big part of my career that values its employees and what we bring to the table, and wanting to bring our holistic selves. So that's why I had to get much more comfortable and confident in speaking out with, this is who I am. This is why this matters. And just from a business standpoint, like, we all want to we have to continue to grow. Everybody's interested in building their audiences. Everybody's interested in raising more money. So to do that, we can't exclude people. So it allows me to be in spaces that I think we weren't welcomed in before, because I've been able to live and lead out loud in this space. And it feels really, really wonderful to be able to do so.
And so I want to stay in that space just a little bit, because I think about like why we have this podcast in the first place. And that is to really help highlight the struggle, right, of coming out. Some people never have to transition, if you will, from out of the closet, from in the closet to out of the closet. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like to me, if I heard you correctly, you were sort of forced into it because of your positionality in your career, right? So can you talk more granularly about, well, what did that feel like for you? What were some of the steps that you took deliberately to say, I'm not going to live a lie anymore? Mm-hmm. Not to say that you were living a lie. Let me be clear, right? I don't want to make assumptions.
Yeah, no, it was like I said. I had the opportunity, like I said, to keep to almost be in three separate spaces, right? Like my family life at home, then my personal life where I was living, and then also my professional life where I was living. And those three things rarely ever intersected with each other, because they weren't in the same place at the same time. Um, but being in a committed relationship and being in a space where I want for my partner to be able to be a part of all facets of my life, that became I have to take him home to meet my family, right? And as like I said, as my career grew, there were expectations um, that I was greeting people, or that I had, lunches and dinners, and people would ask the question, like, oh, specifically like when you move to a new city or you move to a new market and you're taking on new responsibilities, people say, oh, did you move here by yourself? And I wanted to be truthful and honest, because they're going to see me at a concert with the same person every time. So inevitably, the questions would come out, and I would just have to be honest. Like, no, I moved here with my partner. We're here together, and we're embarking on this life. And most people would say, oh, that's wonderful. Can't wait to meet him. And then when we would be in concerts, I'd introduce them, and it would become fine. But I think it was that, like I said, that rapid ascension in terms of my career and my title, and moving from being behind the scenes to being in front of the scenes, where the visibility mattered, and not necessarily being forced, because it wasn't like I was necessarily in the closet, right? It was more or less my private life is my private life, and I don't want you to have to be involved in that. But it mattered to some people, where the invitations would come, and I would like for my partner to be a part of that. Like I said, when we were going to dinners, when we were going to fundraising events, when we're going to concerts, because I didn't want to exclude him from that process, because inevitably, there's a lot of nights and weekends that come along with what I do. So that became, you know, in some respects, the way that we would spend time together. So I had to mesh those two things. But also, I think getting comfortable and the uncomfortable um, pushed me, I think, a little bit faster to get there. And I think that's something that was in the back of my mind, that specifically, like, now living back in the South for the second time. And fortunately, New Orleans is a city like nowhere else, or, around the country and around the world. But what I do still has a lot of people that have conservative values. Um, but understanding that, who I am. I'm a part of this orchestra family and this classical music family just as much as you are, and I have a right to exist in the space just as much as you do. And if who I am makes you uncomfortable, then that's something that's more on you than that is on me. And I think, fortunately, we're in a space where, like, I feel very fortunate that I haven't encountered many people that have had an issue with that. Um, but I feel so much more love than I felt hate, in this space. And that, I think, comes from that authenticity of just being not only a good person, but being people centric and finding ways to just connect with people on a human level. And if it's truly been, like I said, that deep, where there is a hate relationship, or, somebody has that true problem, then I think that we're probably in a better space to weed them out. Anyway, because we're just not in a space where we can tolerate anything like that, because there are members of the orchestra that are a part of this community. There are members on staff, and if I can't be the person that's going to stand up and say that we're not going to tolerate this, then I'm not in the right position. So, yeah.
Really appreciate that. And I think about the times that we're living in now, where people are feeling pretty emboldened to state how they feel about issues around the gay community, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, and stand up and defiantly say that they do not support those initiatives. So I'm wondering, has there ever been a time where, and I heard you say it, but I really appreciate that it's been more love than hate.
Mhm.
Talk about a little bit, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about a challenging time when you were confronted by a situation or someone who may not have been as willing to accept who you are wholly and authentically, and how you navigated that space.
Yeah, I feel fortunate that it hasn't. there haven't been any like personal attacks,
Okay.
on me. I think that, there are some folks who find interesting ways to get their message across. Because I'm in the performing arts, and like I said, who I am helps inform the programming that we put on stage, right? And who we decide to partner with. And there have been times where, we get all of the dog whistles, right? Where people will say there's too much woke programming and there's too much DEI programming. And the way that I respond to everything, right? Because that's part of the job, and I want for people to understand that they can't just throw things out into the atmosphere, and not expect to get a response, right? Always professionally, of course, but I would say pretty much early on in my first season, we were getting a lot of feedback that our programming was too woke, too DEI, too
Interesting.
um,
Hmm.
and the approach that I took is to say, well, we're not taking anything away from anyone else, right? We're still playing a lot of music by the old dead white guys, right? There's still the Beethovens, the Brahms, the Tchaikovskys, right? Their music is going to stay around. Um, but what we're doing here is we're creating opportunities for other people too, right? And we're only growing the pie, right? We're not taking away any opportunities from anyone else. And the challenge with that is that some people did walk away, right? And it's hard to say that, like, we never want to be in a space where we're losing audience members, or we're losing donors. But the reality of the situation is that happens no matter what we do. So for me, I'm like, well, I would rather lean on the side of being more inclusive and lose people because of their either racist, homophobic, bigoted values than lose people strictly because we're going to continue to play the same old music that we've always done. So to me, being more inclusive and leaning into that, has only allowed us to see our audiences grow, see our donor base grow, because we are opening up the doors, like I said, more as wide as possible, as wide as we possibly can, and in a space where people feel much more welcomed. And I've had so many people come up to me where they say I can feel the difference here, where I didn't feel that before. And for me, I'm just doing the work. I'm just showing up every day, doing what I do. And I wish that I like in hindsight, you could put this level of intentionality on it that like there wasn't a strategic plan that we said, okay, well, we're going to do X amount of works by people of color, and we're gonna make sure that we're getting invited to Pride, and we're gonna make sure that we're doing all of these other things. It was just like making the right decision in the moment and figuring out the path forward from there. But also, I think for me personally, I think that I feel much more comfortable in that decision making because I know that I take care of people first, right? And when people feel like you're invested in them, then then they're willing to stand behind you. When people walk away, because of those values that are not right for, that are not, I would say, in the majority, um, then they say, I still feel like we're making the right decisions, and that gives me a sense of, like I can breathe better. And I don't feel as much pressure when you feel those people walking away, because it's hard, when you have to stand on those principles, because sometimes those people are very loud. They'll write fortunately, we haven't had this happen here, but they'll write an op-ed, or they'll go and they'll tell their peers that, like, we're no longer giving to these institutions, or we're no longer supporting them because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And I feel comfortable that, like, that I can stand on those principles to say we made the right decisions in this moment, and it helps me sleep at night. But then on the personal side, I make sure that I find ways to continue to pour into myself too. And sometimes that is taking breaks. Sometimes that is important for me to like put stopping points in and say, this can be a tomorrow problem. Human resource fun. Like that might mean, I remember in my first season, I said, I need to find ways to keep myself connected and do things just for me. So I set a goal. I was like, I'm going to go to 20 concerts over the course of this year that are not mine. right? And that could be anything from a small concert in a jazz club to something at the Superdome, right? Something massive. And within like the first quarter of the year, first 3 months before March, I had already gone to 25, right? And that just felt so invigorating to me to be able to just get out and try to unplug a little bit and do something that was meaningful for me. Um, I'm also in this wonderful city that has such a culinary tradition that I just love to like just go out to eat much more than I probably should, because a lot of my suits now don't fit because
Do that with
I'm
stuff.
eating, yeah, I'm eating my way through the city. But doing things big or small for yourself are absolutely critical. And that might mean spending more time with family, spending more time with friends. Um, Taking on new hobbies or things that are going to just give you an opportunity to refresh and recharge yourself is so critical, and it doesn't have to be like, okay, I got to take a 2-3 week vacation and I got to backpack through South America, right? Like everybody's not capable of that. I don't know if I'm capable of it, just just personally, but finding something that's going to be meaningful for you, and doing that, like blocking out time for yourself, is so important, and sticking to it, right? Like being protective of your time, is so important. I can't echo that enough.
So, when we think about, I love how you're talking about self care, and it makes me think about, I'm forgetting the author right now, but she's the author of the Nap Ministries, if you're familiar with that.
Hmm.
And she talks about the idea of reclaiming ourselves by disrupting traditional belief systems around rest. And her latest book is actually called Rest as Resistance or something like that, right? I know I'm
Hmm.
misquoting that, but that's the gist of it. And owning the fact that, wait a minute, we've been conditioned to think that if we were to take 10 minutes and take a power nap, that we're lazy, right?
Hmm.
Or that we're shiftless, or that, all of those stereotypes that have been placed on us. So I love how you're saying, well, you're being very intentional about your time. But the reality is, we don't live in a society that supports that. And so being able to, one, display your leadership skills and say, I am going to model expectations by doing it, says a
Hmm.
lot about you, right?
Yeah, but I generally have this rule of thumb, where I tell folks, like, if I'm leaving before you, you better not be more than 10 minutes behind me, you know? So trying to make sure that I'm encouraging people to like not stay in the office later than they need to be. I make sure that, like, especially when people are taking vacations, I'm like, don't answer an email, while you're on vacation. Like, make sure that you are setting up your out of office so that way people know that if somebody's sending you an email, that you say, I am out of office and I will get back to you when I get back. And like, if you need something that's urgent, here are the other people that you can go to. It's not me right now. And it's like, modeling that is important. And I think that that's one of the things that don't show up on the job description, right? Specifically as a leader, to say, like, how you show up to work every day, and how you tell people that you prioritize your time sets the example for how they should prioritize their time. And it's so important. Nobody teaches you that, right? Like, you kind of have to learn it as you're going through. And I
Uh,
think that I have to model that as much as I can.
well, of course. And I appreciate that. It makes me think about, well, so what advice would you have for our allies who do not identify
Mm.
as queer? Like, so what advice would you give to them to say, hey, you are in partnership with us.
Mhm.
This is something you can do concretely.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the big thing is not to try to force allyship. you know like, you sometimes you see cases where folks are like, they want to be an ally so bad, and sometimes you don't need them to be an ally. Like, I can advocate for myself. i can
Mhm.
i can do the things that I need to do for myself, so I don't need you to speak on my behalf. Um so and understanding where the person is and what does an ally look like to that person, I think, is going to be the most critical thing. But then sometimes allyship is to be be in a space that allows people to be their true and authentic self, right? Like if you're in a space where somebody is much more introverted than extroverted, right? That does not mean that you have to try to pull them to the extroverted side, right? Allowing them to be themselves and allowing them to be comfortable, that they will come to you when they feel comfortable coming to you. Or if they don't feel comfortable coming to you, then that's okay, right? Like I preach this a lot, that you don't have to be friends with everyone. We don't have to preach to like this family atmosphere, like we're coworkers, right?
Mhm.
I don't have to tell you about all of my personal life. I don't have to tell you about what I did this weekend. I don't have to tell you about my partner. That's something that I make the choice to choose to do with you. And don't take it personally if that's the case, you know. So really taking a step back and observing and creating a space where somebody can feel comfortable enough to share those things. Don't push. Um, and just be your true authentic self, and understand that somebody just might want to clock in, do the work, clock out, and go home. All right. And that's okay. So figuring out what your relationships are going to be like and try not to force them is what I would say, to anyone that wants or desire to be an ally.
I'd like to posit one question for you, and that is, like, what type of world do you dream of that includes the LGBTQIA plus community, that's completely accepting? What does that world look like to Anwar?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I've never been asked that before. Um, the world that I dream of is a world where people can be their authentic selves, you know, and not have to worry about their rights being taken away, that no one ever questions the why we exist, or the how we exist, right? That we are just a part of the normal existence of human life. Um, and that we don't have to necessarily otherize each other, right? That we can be celebrated for all the things that make us unique and different. And that I don't have to be in a space where I have to always explain who I am and what I do and why am I here and what's my background and all of those things. Like, I just want to be in a space where we can just exist, with each other, and find so much more joy in living. Like, I feel like there's always a fight that we're having to fight for. And, working in the arts, we always can dream about, a world where we can come together and listen to music and maybe we could fight over whether we didn't like that piece or not. Right. But not about, the who we are. Um, but more about, like, I really enjoyed that piece of music and it helped me become a better person, because of it. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a good enough answer or not, but it's a fantastic question. But I think that that's the world that I would like to see. Yeah.
That is a beautiful answer. For one main reason, it's authentically yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
And I love how you mentioned the othering, because that brings to mind Toni Morrison. And she gave a long series of lectures around how we dehumanize people. And what I heard in your answer was a world where we are seen as humans and we can show up authentically and live that life as we see fit. But I just wanted to ask you if there's anything that you want to say or have as a final word.
I want to say we talked a bit about young people today, or I spoke about young people, and I think that if I have something to, anyone who might be young, that's listening to this or watching this, take your time. Take your time to live life. You don't have to have it all figured out today. You know, this your life will unfold as you're moving through, and I don't think that you have to have it all figured out today. Is the big thing. You're going to continue to be poured in. You're going to continue to be and have experiences. that are going to make you a more well-rounded person. And, who you are, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you're gonna look back and you're gonna say, I'm glad that I went through that, whether it was good, bad, or ugly, because it made you a better person and you made it through to the other side. So have courage, have faith, that it will and should get better for you consistently.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And on those words, we're going to say thank you for creating this space. I greatly appreciate you making the time to have this really valuable conversation. And hopefully, someone can take something away that will help them see that, yes, it gets better and it's not as bad as you think.
Thank you so much. Thank you.